Hi, I'm John Maxwell. When the top companies in the world are looking for trainers, speakers, and coaches, there's one name that stands above the rest, and that's Maxwell Leadership. Our certified team members have gotten proven results for companies all over the globe, and our reputation, I'm proud to say, is second to none. Some of our members have risen to the top of their profession, including the one you're going to meet today. I proudly introduce you to my friend Bob Fabian Zinka.
Welcome to the Leadership and Success Podcast with your host, Coach BZ, where we help you lead with purpose and succeed with impact. If you're ready to grow into the kind of leader others want to follow, this podcast is for you. If you're determined to elevate your success and leave a lasting legacy, this podcast is for you. As my mentor, Dr. John C. Maxwell reminds us, everything rises and falls on leadership. Our goal is simple: to inspire you, challenge you, and equip you with insights that can transform the trajectory of your leadership journey. Welcome aboard to another episode of the Leadership and Success Podcast with Coach BZ.
For your weekend wisdom, here's something I learned commanding 3,000 sailors. The best leaders aren't the ones who have all the answers. They're the ones who ask the best questions. I've seen officers try to solve every problem themselves, and I've seen others who knew how to unlock the intelligence of their entire team. The difference? Curiosity. When you're curious about your people's perspectives, you discover solutions you never would have found alone. When you're curious about different approaches, you find better ways to achieve your goals. This weekend, instead of trying to have all the answers, try asking better questions, because the leader who asks the best questions usually finds the best solutions. Have a great weekend, and remember, your team's wisdom is waiting for your curiosity.
Ever feel like leadership advice is just noise? The loudest sound is silence is the real deal. Quick, no-nonsense leadership gems straight from a Navy captain. It's like getting a crash course in badassery without leaving your couch. Dive into epic tales of ship bridges and boardrooms, where silence isn't golden, it's powerful. Perfect for anyone tired of the same old corporate blah blah. Grab it now and level up your leadership game.
All right, welcome to our last episode of the Leadership and Success Podcast for today. I can't believe we had 3 episodes back to back to back. This is just wonderful. I am really honored and privileged to be speaking to our next guest. But before I do our moment of gratitude, as you guys know, we do this because in the military, right, service members and veterans, it's about 21, 22 suicide happening every single day. Not once a year, not once a quarter. Every single day. And we believe here that it's not possible to be suicidal and be grateful at the very same time. So for a moment of gratitude today, like I've been really since June 10th, I am so grateful for freedom. I believe God made man, woman to be free. And I really celebrate freedom. And America is what it represents to me, right? The home of the brave, the land of the free. We are not free until everyone is free. So I am really grateful for freedom today. So let us know in the chat, where are you guys joining us from? What city and what state? We are now a global show, so if you're outside of the US, we'd like to know which country as well. And what are you grateful for today? And of course, if you have a question for my guest, for the captain, go ahead and type your question in the comments on YouTube or LinkedIn, and we're going to be trying to answer your question live. So I want to say hello to Daniel Young. Is a very active member of our tribe here, coming to us from Maitland, Florida. But also, one of my mentors here, Captain JP Cordell, is watching on LinkedIn. Welcome, sir. All right, let me see if I can properly introduce our guest today. All right. Man, we are going to have a lot to talk about, including the best selling book from my guest. But as an introduction, We're going to be talking to Captain John J.C. Carter. He spent more than 30 years serving our nation in the U.S. Navy, specializing in surface warfare and nuclear propulsion, and ultimately commanding 3 Navy ships, the USS Salvor, the USS Roosevelt, DDG-80, and also the USS Bataan, this last ship, LHD 5. Actually, I think I was on that ship a few years ago. But he has also served as a reactor officer aboard the nuclear-powered aircraft carrier USS Dwight Eisenhower, CVN-69. I guess that ship has been in the news lately. But after retiring from the Navy, JC took those hard-earned leadership lessons into corporate manufacturing, into education and executive coaching and entrepreneurship. Today, he is the founder of the Leadership Bridge Institute, where he helps organizations bridge the critical gap between being a great technical expert and becoming an exceptional strategic leader. His bridge method emphasizes assess, train, perform, and then review, right? Connecting leadership development to real-world application. So Captain Carter is also the author of the Loudest Sound is Silence, leadership lesson from the bridge to the boardroom, a powerful collection of leadership lessons forged aboard the U.S. Navy warships and also translated for leaders everywhere. So one of his principles stopped me in my track. He says, the loudest sound in any organization is often the sound of what no one is saying. So learn to hear it. That is leadership. So part of what we're going to be learning today is why great leaders ask before they order and distinguish defiance from confusion, but also how leaders make the transition from technical expert to strategic leader, from solving every problem themselves to developing teams capable of solving problems without them. So without any further ado, please help me welcome to the Leadership and Success Podcast, the one and only retired U.S. Navy Captain J.C. Carter.
Hey, thank you very much, BZ, for having me aboard. That's probably one of the best introductions I've ever gotten in my life. So thank you.
Thank you, sir. Great honor and privilege to be speaking to you today, sir. Maybe to get started, is there something you are thankful for today, sir?
Oh, I'm sorry, say that again.
Is there something you are grateful for today?
Oh, I am grateful for the great opportunity to have an impact in the lives of people around me.
Yes.
I think, service and they talk about being a servant leader, but I think that is to being empathetic and reaching people where they're at and having that great opportunity. Both, I had it for 30 years in the service, and now having that opportunity to do it both with my church and community and my business. It's really such a great pleasure.
That is really, really amazing. Leading both in uniform and out of uniform as well. It looks like you are doing even more now than you used to do on active duty. So based on all of the research we have done, that's really amazing. Is there something about you, sir, that most people may not know when they first meet you? Maybe a unique skill, a superpower, or just something the majority of people may not have a clue?
A superpower about me. I think probably my one superpower is my belief in being, empathetic and vulnerable, and believing that you can be all that and still be really successful. I think, you have high expectations, and then you couple that with high empathy and vulnerability. I think that's what real success is. So I think maybe that's my superpower.
But now, as a Navy captain, I must ask you, sir, like I've been in the Navy for almost 22 years now. I think leadership has changed throughout my career. Early on, I think it was a lot of, macho leadership. I'm the alpha male, I'm the boss, and I tell you to jump and you say how high type of thing. But more and more now, the best leaders I've had throughout my Navy career, I've shown a lot of empathy and emotional intelligence. They do care about the mission of the organization, but they care about each individual specifically too. And you can really feels that. Has that been your experience in the Navy, sir?
Yeah, I think you mature in your process. I think when I first started off, it was really about, am I the smartest person in the room? Am I the traffic cop? Am I the one making sure that all the tasks are getting done? And am I working hard to be that person? And what I really realized is that my job was really to be capacity developer to build capacity in my team, make them want to take the lead, go from being a doer to really being, the leader and creating that environment.
Wow. And if we could go back to the beginning, sir, who was John Carter before he became Captain Jesse Carter?
Well, John Carter started off as as a kid from a small town on the east end of Long Island. I grew up on the water, absolutely loved it. My family was all, served. And matter of fact, I think every grandkid on on the Carter side has. Hello?
Yes. Yes, sir.
Yeah, every kid on the Carter side all served, so it was probably the greatest joy of mine to go into the Navy and to kind of prove myself.
Wow, that is really awesome. Is that why you chose the Navy out of all of the other branches, sir?
Yeah, without a doubt. The sea was part of our life. Both grandfathers served in the Navy, so that was really what kind of drove me.
That's really amazing. And then joining the Navy, you end up retiring as a captain. I believe it's less than 4% of people who join the Navy end up at that rank. And not only that, you also commanded 3 different ships. That is really quite extraordinary. What did command, sir, teach you about leadership that no classroom or leadership course or book could ever teach?
I think what command teaches you is that you're making real high pressure decisions, and you can only do that with a team that you trust. Because at the end of the day, you need to have full faith that their decisions are based on the intent that you make under high pressure situations, and that's what really separates, I think, service related experiences in command from sort of my time outside of command.
Wow. Because you have also led thousands of sailors through high pressure environment. I guess that's an understatement. Was there a moment, sir, when you realized that everything I thought I knew about leadership is wrong, or at least incomplete?
It's certainly the biggest thing I probably thought was that, I thought leadership was about, executing and all of that and, managing it all on my own. And what I ended up being was really being the bottleneck. And what I really learned was that leadership was about, developing the capacity of those that worked for me, teaching them that, hey, here's my intent, now go lead. And then, sort of orchestrating it, at a much higher level. And so that was really the biggest change, is that, hey, you're not a doer and you can't do it all, and you're not the smartest person in the room, and that you serving them and making them successful is what really makes you successful.
Yeah, and I kind of like the way the Navy does leadership, because when you are a junior officer, first you are an individual contributor, then you become maybe a division officer, maybe a department head, and later on XO, and then if you are lucky, commanding officer. But I guess one question I wanted to ask, sir, many people associate military leadership with rank, with authority, and with giving orders, which I guess is partly true. But what do civilians misunderstand most about leading sailors aboard a warship?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think a lot of times they think it's really easy. Hey, you give them an order, you bark out an order, and then they respond. And I guess, probably in some of the most simplest terms, that's probably true. I think it probably creates those, short-term wins. But when you really, in order to win a war, you really need commitment. And you only get that commitment if they fully trust you, they're committed, they understand the why. Then they'll go all those extra miles. And that's what you really require. You don't require that sort of immediate, short-term response. You need that sort of deeply ingrained commitment to the mission.
And also, what about when you transition from being an individual contributor to becoming a leader of people? Because it seems like, for the most part, people get promoted to become manager or have people under them after they have proven themselves, usually as a technical expert in their field. But there's a big difference, right, between you being the best at what you do and then you leading other people or trying to get work through other people. The transition is not always easy for a lot of folks. How was that transition for for you, sir, from becoming a technical expert to becoming a leader of people?
Yeah. So one of the things that I'm really passionate about, and I think that's kind of one of those areas where I really specialize in, is that, I lived in a world, both on the nuclear side and even in, commanding a ship, and ships, they're so technically based. And so often what ends up happening is you get these people that are such great technical experts, and they thrive. And therefore, of course, you say, hey, this is the person that we need to promote. This is the person we need to advance. This is the person that needs to lead on. But then they get there and they suddenly realize that those skills, it's really a much different skill set that you need to use in order to lead people, to be a force multiplier, and to sort of create other people's capacity. And that's a different skill set. And so helping develop that skill set in people. And then, clearly, one of the interesting pieces is that you do it at such a junior level. And then, as you grow, you learn how to do it on a much broader scale with, much more senior folks, and how to kind of help them on their edges. So it's really a fascinating transition. And I always say it's probably the most important transition someone makes in their, professional career.
Yes, and one of your quotes that I really like a lot, you've said that leadership is forged through experience, practice, and continuous refinement. I really like that a lot, because it seems like you never arrive, right? It's not like you are going up the mountaintop and then, okay, I am at the top. I no longer need to learn or refine or get any better. It's like there is always something to learn, it seems. Who are maybe some of the people who have helped forge you as a leader, and what did they teach you that you still carry today?
Oh, probably, probably one of my chief petty officers was probably the person who forged me the most. And he said to me, and it was probably very much along this line, sir, you can't do all the work yourself. Your job is to, teach your folks and to empower them to do the work, and to use your rank is more as a tool to help get through the roadblocks they need to get over to accomplish their work. It was really about, before we started talking about servant leadership, it was really, using your rank as a tool and not a pedestal, and helping others be successful and eliminating their barriers. And that was really very profound perspective for me, and probably the one that I think even to this day, I remember when I left my last job, I would always say, hey, how can I help you today? It was one of the things I would always say to somebody, because I always viewed that as, hey, that's primarily my job, making their life easier and more successful.
That is really, really, really powerful. I think that's really the essence of leadership, isn't it? And for those who may not be in the military, a chief is a senior enlisted. So technically, you outrank them. But in reality, when you are a junior officer, right, 01, 02, 03, 04, instant lieutenant or lieutenant commander, the chief mess, really, they are there to mentor you, really. Because you're fresh out of the academy or whatever path you got your commission, you don't really know everything, definitely not how to run the Navy. But the chief, they are the anchor. They really know exactly how to run the Navy, and they have so much experience. And it's really important for a junior officer to be listening to the chief, isn't it, sir?
Oh, without a doubt. They have 20 years of experience, and part of their charter is to help develop the junior officer, and they really are there to be that sort of professional sounding board and help develop those leadership skills. And mostly, and what even happens even when you're in command is that you often get blessed to have a great command master chief that usually you bounce things off of and get the pulse of what's going on and all that kind of stuff.
With all of your white that's on deck plate leadership, so critical. All right, let's talk about your best-selling book, sir. So this is the book, The Loudest Sound is Silence: Leadership Lesson from the Bridge to the Boardroom. Why did this book have to be written, sir? What inspired you to write the book?
What really inspired me about writing this book was I had a unique opportunity to really kind of, take all the things that I learned, all those hard lessons, and really be that sort of bridge between, what I learned in the military service and then my experience in the corporate world, and how at the end of the day, being a leader is about being a human being and human interactions.
Wow.
And although the word and the terminology may be different, its application is very similar in both worlds. And
Yes.
can I take sort of that hard-learned lessons, those lessons that you don't get, pursuing an MBA, and kind of capture them for people to see, whether you're a young junior officer or whether you're a young executive. It really does kind of feed both of those, I think, group.
Wow, that is really powerful, sir. And when you wrote the book, was there a chapter that was maybe the most challenging to you, or that maybe changed some of your perception about leadership once you finish writing it?
That's always kind of an interesting perspective, as I kind of went through areas where sometimes it was where I had failed. I think some of those were moments of where I was probably the most excited or most frustrated, and where those chapters kind of reinvented or brought back sort of some of those memories, memories of having a really brilliant sailor supply officer who was probably the best supply officer I ever had.
Wow.
In 3 command tours, but professionally was somewhat abusive, and on a sort of non-work environment, extremely toxic. And how do you overcome, how do you live with that for months before you finally say enough is enough, and knowing that whole sort of experience of how to kind of go after those toxic, and I think that whole realization that, hey, at the end of the day, it's culture is the mission, and that's what you're there for as a CEO, and having to step away from that and have that perspective.
Wow, that is very insightful what you just said, sir. Because in the Navy, like everybody knows, we have 3 core values, right? Honor, courage, and commitment. So technically, everything we do, every decision we make, we have to look at them through that prism, right? Through the lenses of honor, courage, and commitment. That's the way we should recruit people. That's the way we should let people go. And I guess the question I have for you, sir, when it comes to competence, when you have people who are really competent, who can do their job very, very well, but for whatever reason, they do not align with the culture of your organization. They don't show those values of honor, of courage, or commitment. I guess the question is, how do you handle that?
Having thought about this, I long determined, there's probably two fundamental rules. One is, if I wouldn't put up with this behavior from somebody who was a little bit more junior, I would probably I probably would not shouldn't be putting up with them, is probably the first thing that I learned. And so that was probably my first major takeaway. I think my second major takeaway through all of that was, so I kind of lost my train of thought here.
Yes, so you were saying you would not put up with it. So we're talking about making sure that you make all of your decisions through the core values of your organization.
Yeah, I think the other part and piece of that, and I agree, was one, understanding the perspective about, hey, if I wouldn't tolerate for somebody junior, why am I tolerating it from this person, even though they may be a superstar, if I wouldn't discipline them. And then I think the second part of that is always reinforcing to everybody that your loyalty first is to the organization. A lot of times they'll have very tight relationships that are outside of not just the Navy structure, but whether they're in the chief's mess or somewhere else. And I always say that those organizational values are the same as the Navy's values, and that you need to that's where your values need to align. That's where your loyalty needs to align.
That is so powerful. Earlier this morning, I was talking to General Twanda Young, and she told me something. I'm not going to say it exactly, but basically the gist of it was, as a commanding officer, you do have values and standard. And the moment you don't live by them, then they become substandard. And then this new substandard becomes the new standard if you are not careful. And I feel like that's probably one of the, what should I call it? The higher calling of leadership, isn't it? When you are the leader, yes, the buck stops with you. But I guess I'm guessing your unit, your command, your people, they really expect you to live by your own standard, don't they?
Oh, they most certainly do. And when we talk about, hey, what's probably the biggest way to cause a loss in leadership, or what's the biggest impact to your leadership, is not doing what you say. Hypocrisy is by far the biggest impact, or the biggest ruiner of leadership.
So true. In many ways, kind of like being a parent. I remember I have two daughters. My kids, you cannot tell them, hey, do as I say, but not as I do, because what they do very well, kids, they watch their parents very, very closely.
Right.
But something now in your book, so your chapter are anchored to specific ships and moment, which I've never seen a book written quite like that, which is really great. You go from the USS Mississippi in 1992 all the way through the USS Bataan in 2015. Why did you decide to teach leadership through stories rather than simply write another book of leadership principles?
Principles, you kind of just put them out there. Stories, when you're sitting there, listening to me tell the story about a sailor on Bataan, you feel it emotionally. You're connected to it. You get the vibe from it. It really kind of gets to another place in our mind. It kind of lowers our mind's defenses, and it really does allow us to kind of taste and feel it. And I think we become emotionally connected to it, because leadership is really about human interactions, and that means so much more than simply bullet points that one can read in a book.
That makes sense, because I also love dedication in your book. You say it's dedicated to every sailor who stood a watch, held the line, and trusted their leaders. Wow. And to every leader who earns that trust. One of my mentors told me that rank is rented, but trust is earned. What does it actually take to earn someone's trust when they are placing their safety, their career, or even their life in our Navy in your hand?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, it's it's consistency. It's doing what you say you're going to do, standing by your principles day in and day out. I think that's probably the first step of building their trust, and the second step of that is being vulnerable, and that is, hey, showing your human side. That, hey, if you make a mistake, if you mess up, you're free to admit that, hey, I didn't do this right. I'm gonna, this is what I'm gonna do to make it better. And I think the combination of both that consistency to your principles and your personal accountability or your vulnerability is what really builds that trust that people then will follow you, to no end.
Yes, that is amazing, because there have definitely been some commanding officers throughout my career I would follow everywhere they lead, because I knew they really cared about me as a person. And of course, our mission is greater than ourselves. Now, in your book, so chapter 1, I really like that one, defiance or confusion. Ask before you order. And I guess in my opinion, the Navy is probably the most defiant branch of the U.S. military. We tend to defy pretty much all of the orders we get from the DoD, and eventually we comply. Whereas the Army tend to comply first and as soon as possible. At least in my experience, that's what I have seen throughout my career. Can you tell us about the USS Eisenhower story behind defiance or confusion, and what happened, and what did it teach you about the danger of assuming we understand someone else's behavior?
Yeah, so take a relatively technical issue, which is we have what's called lube oil pumps on purifiers that are on main engines in the propulsion plant, and believe it or not, they're highly machined, centrifugal. They're pretty complicated pieces of equipment, and we had figured out how to break two of the four over a 3-week period. And I had become pretty frustrated with it all. So of course we had gone through sort of this long process of what I thought was training and teaching and tools and put processes in place to prevent it from happening. And of course I get this phone call, and it was really from a frustrated LPO that the sailor had once again put this thing together incorrectly, and we could have broken it, and he's just not learning. And I was really frustrated at this point. And then I said to myself, I just took a deep breath. I said, there's something here that is just not right. And so I went down there and I had him walk me through it, and it was clear that the instructions weren't ideally written. And he was very much a person who liked to follow instructions, and follow them step by step, and it just wasn't quite as clear. And so it really kind of taught me this sort of lesson that people come to work 99% of the time and they want to do a good job. They not looking to screw up on purpose. And often, it's probably not defiance, and you need to go figure out, what's causing it. And it kind of gets back to that whole entire, how can I help? And that was really it. And, and I mirrored him up with somebody who had a lot more experience, that really understood the intricacies of what was written in the instruction and was able to kind of walk him through it. And that sailor ended up becoming a phenomenal sailor, 6 months after it was over. So
that is really amazing. I love that, because I feel like for some of the leaders here, before we conclude that a person won't do what we ask for, it looks like we should be asking the question first, right? What question should a leader ask first, especially when we're talking right now about defiance or confusion? Ask before you order. So before we give orders, what question should we ask as leaders?
Oh, I think clearly as we're giving it to them, make sure that, hey, is it clear? Do you understand my intent? Is do you have all the tools and resources you need to accomplish this? And then clearly, what is your expectation in terms of follow up and delegated authority. So I think there's lots of parts and pieces there that go into sort of when you kind of give that order. And I became much more nuanced at it as I became much more senior.
Yes. And I think another very intriguing chapter is chapter number 4, The Day I Fired My Best Sailor. I think it's probably one of the most compelling titles in your book, sir. So I do have to ask, the day I fired my best sailor, why would a commanding officer fire his best sailor?
Yeah, and we touched on this, I think earlier in this whole entire segment, in terms of, this person was phenomenal at their job, but they were a toxic individual, both inside their department, and their behavior, sort of the way they carried themselves on their personal side, was just, horrible. And, like I said, it was probably one of the best supply officers. I commanded 3 ships, had probably, 15 supply officers, and he was probably one of the best. And certainly I leaned on him heavily. And so I think those are those times in your moment where you have to continuously reinforce yourself that, the culture is the mission. And that is what's really important. And you can overcome, losing a top performer, but you cannot overcome impact to your culture, which so impacts your morale and all the other people there that are trying to do the right thing.
Yes, and also like chapter 5, it reminded me of, I think Simon Sinek wrote a book by that title, Never Eat Alone. When you commanded the USS Bataan, that's a lot of people, an enormous organization. Why is chapter 5 called Never Eat Alone?
What I found is that people nowadays believe that, hey, you can create a dashboard now that can answer any question, and you can sit there and almost like you're flying a plane, have a cockpit, and run a huge organization and
Mm,
understand what's going on simply by some numbers that show up on your screen. And what I
yes.
truly want to share with people is that that is really not the case. It's all about presence, and you
Mm,
need to, however you get that presence, whether it's eating with the crew, whether it's walking around during cleaning stations. But that's when you find out, hey, did you know that, hey, this piece of equipment is broken? We're
yes.
really struggling with supply department, or hey, the ship's out of toilet paper. There's so
Mm,
many things that come up, by you kind of getting out there and feeling the heartbeat, and you
yes.
overcome issues way before they become crises, I find. And
I
it
love
gives that
that.
whole nother perspective. I used to say that 30 to 45 minutes that I spent, on my morning walkabout, paid dividends throughout the rest of the day.
Wow, that is really powerful. I think I first learned that from Ken Blanchard. I think he wrote the 1 Minute Manager. He used to talk about leading or management by walking around, and that is so powerful. So, what type of information you believe, sir, that becomes available only, at the lunch table, on the deck plate, or during an informal conversation, that you will never be able to see on a dashboard or a PowerPoint as a senior leader?
Well, I think clearly from a cultural perspective, we'll figure out real quickly where the
Mm,
struggling issues are, whether it's a supply issue, whether it's an engineering issue, whether
yes.
it's a you know production issue. Those issues come up very quickly, and you can see them when they're kind of working their way through them. And
Yes.
often you have a perspective that, hey, if I'm having this problem in this area, is it a ship-wide thing? And that's the other
Mm,
piece I found, really, kind of a very nice perspective, is that, hey, I got
yes.
this department that's struggling with this problem. Well, how does that apply to the other departments? And are we looking at it from a ship-wide perspective? So I think that's one of the first things you kind of get out of it. Secondly, you can usually feel the time and tempo of the ship, whether they're in a good mood, a bad mood. That generally is there. And then on the side note, a lot of times when you walk past people, you can just tell by whether they're looking at you and smiling or glancing the other way.
Hmm.
That's all sort of signs of how things are going. How's your culture
Yes.
going, that you don't get when you're sitting in your cabin.
Yeah, command climate. That is very, very important, isn't it? And I was really surprised, but I love looking at chapter 7 and 9, right? I was wrong and on it first. Uh, in my experience, it really takes a lot of courage, even humility, to say that you were wrong, especially if you are the commanding officer, one of the senior leader within the organization. I guess one question I have for you, sir, is why are those words so difficult for leader to say, especially at the senior level?
I think you work so hard to strive to get to this position, and then suddenly you realize you're there, and you have this sort of impression that you need to be invaluable.
Mhm.
That you can do no wrong, and that if somehow you make a mistake, then people are not going to view you with this like high level of esteem, or they're not going to have confidence in you leading them forward. And I
Right.
think what I really learned over the years was that by sort of showing the example that, hey, when I was wrong or I did something wrong and I kind of admitted to it and I brought it forward, it really allows people that feeling of sort of psychological safety, that, hey, if
Mm.
they have an issue, if the captain can bring make a mistake and admit to it, then, hey, if there's an issue that I made a mistake in, I can admit to it freely, and we can solve
Mm.
that quickly, vice it becoming a bigger problem.
That is so powerful. And those are exactly the commanding officer and skippers I would follow anywhere they lead. When I know that they are honest, and when they make mistakes, because they're human beings just like everybody else, they face up to it. That is really a great sign for leadership, isn't it?
Oh, yes, without a doubt. And I think, that, sort of, openness and psychological safety, it permeates. I
Yeah.
used to always say that every time we did an evolution debrief, I was always the first person to get up there and say, okay, here are the things that I could have done better during this sea and anchor. Here's the things I could have done better during this gun shoot, as your captain. And then what it really did is it really opened up the floor for other people to come forward and say, hey, well, this is what I did, or this is what I could have done better. And a lot of times it's not the big things. We're talking about, fixing those even smaller issues to be much more, precise and accurate in the way we sort of execute.
Wow, because when I think about it, we talk about accountability, we talk about loyalty. It is really a two-way street, isn't it? It's not just the command who's loyal and accountable to the commanding officer, but it's the commanding officer being accountable to their people too, right, sir?
Oh, without a doubt. I think you feel as a commanding officer of a ship that you are 100% accountable to the people that you've been in charge to lead. And I think the Navy has made a habit that it always holds the CEO ultimately accountable for that crew and that ship, regardless of where they were, because they were at the end of the day accountable for the culture that created that situation. They may not have been there when that situation occurred, but they created that culture, or they're responsible for that culture.
Because in your book, your leadership principle, it includes the statement that accountability is the highest form of respect. I think I agree with that. That's really powerful. But what does that mean to you, sir? Accountability being the highest form of respect.
I think when your crew knows that you are holding yourself accountable, and that you will do that, even when it's hard to your principles and to your beliefs. And I think, to the story about firing your top performer because you're accountable to your values. I think that is really what drives, respect. Accountable to, them, and making sure that you care more about their success than your personal success. I think that's the other piece of accountability that certainly is adds to it, or generates that respect.
And having said that, sir, can a leader be both highly accountable and compassionate, or do leaders sometimes confuse compassion with lowering their standards?
Oh no. I hope at the end of the day, when people think about me, they say, Captain Carter had these incredibly high standards and expectations of his crew, but at the end of the day, he cared extremely deeply about them, always had their back, and their success was the most important thing in the world to them. If that's what they, kind of remember or believe, then, that's, kind of my success.
Wow, that is really powerful. Now, there is another chapter I really found fascinating, chapter 10, Question Up. Right, I really love that title. How does a leader create an environment where a junior sailor or junior employee really feels safe telling the captain or the CEO, sir, ma'am, I think you are wrong? I guess that's what we call psychological safety. I think in all of the industry, in the military, that's probably one of the most important things, because if something is wrong and the junior person cannot say that, people might actually die. So it's very important that they live in an environment where they can. Isn't that true?
Yeah, most certainly. So I would say probably the biggest thing you can do is, generally when you're in that situation, what ends up happening is you're in this, high stress environment, and you can have two responses. You can either turn around and snap their head off for why did you say that? And nobody will ever speak up again. Or, the contrary is that you can really praise them and thank them and say, hey, great point. I didn't see that. Thank you so very much. And that's how you kind of create that environment. Because if on the one side, people will never bring you bad news. And what keeps the ship from running aground is when people will tell you that, hey, Captain, you're heading into danger.
Yes. Wow. I guess that does take some humility too, doesn't it, as a senior leader?
Without a doubt, humility, you got to check your ego at the door, all those kind of things. And you got to have faith that, people will much more appreciate you for that, and follow you much more than they are trying to have this false persona that, you're perfect.
Yeah, because one of my mentor now with retired Army General Biggs taught me is that rank is rented, but trust is earned. And I kind of like the principle in your book. You talk about rank is not truth. I think that really speaks. What did the Navy teach you, sir, about the danger of believing that the senior person automatically has all of the best information and all of the answers?
Yeah, so the more senior you get, the more immensely immense the scope of your work is that you
Sure.
do, and there is no possible way that you can be an expert in all of these detailed fields of areas on how things operate and work. You can have a good sort of overall understanding, but you certainly don't understand and know the details. And what you really need to do is you got to be able to create that sort of culture where here's my intent. It
Mhm.
should work as designed. And if it doesn't, you need to come and tell me what we need to do to make it that way. You really transition more into that facilitator to make them successful, I think, is really. And so, rank doesn't mean the truth. And you may, just because, the way you see it is the way you think it should be, or the way, it may very well not be that way. And somebody, ideally you've created that environment where someone will stand up and tell you that, hey, Captain, this isn't right. And
Mm.
you are, humble enough to take that on.
Now, talking about psychological safety, I know in the Navy we usually praise in public, right? And then if you need to admonish someone or counsel them, do that in private. But as a senior leader, what should you do when someone challenges you publicly? Uh, the way I'm thinking is, isn't there like a reaction in that moment, kind of going to determine whether anybody will ever challenge the senior leader again based on how they respond?
I think it depends. I think very often it does on how you respond. I think, normally my experience is that, people would challenge you sort of in a public and, in that environment when you're in the middle of sort of a high end, high pressure situation, and they kind of
Mhm.
feel like, hey, I need, time is of the essence. I need to get this out. Generally, so I think those are the moments where you really need to make sure that people are psychologically, we call psychologically safe to kind of voice that opinion. And very often, people would then, come and talk to me in my cabin
Mm.
if they weren't happy with the way something was going. And I would often provide them that opportunity to kind of vent. And we'd have a very open discussion inside the cabin. But usually, then the goal is once we leave the cabin, we all are of one frame of mind. So probably the most time where people have ever kind of stood up and said, "Hey, Cap, I don't think you're right here," and they always did it in a very, very polite
Mm.
manner, was probably often, on the bridge or during high end operations where
Yes.
their interaction was important because it was timely to the situation. I guess is probably the best way to describe it.
That is really powerful, and I really believe, based on my experience in the Navy, I would say the military in general. So we tend to really form leaders, not followers, but leaders. Even at the lowest rank, I think, even as a junior enlisted, even as an E1, I felt like the Navy was challenging me to become a leader, even at that rank. And one thing that you write that really stood out to me is instruction creates followers, intent creates leaders. Can you unwrap that for us, sir?
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing is that you have worked your way up through the ranks and you've done it all, and you could very easily sort of tell somebody and give them very explicit sort of the method and the direction
Mhm.
on how to go out and do this thing that I want done. And what I rapidly learned is that it was really more important to really give them intent. Hey, this is what I'd like it to look like at the end of the day, and then from there, give them the opportunity to have that experience because overcoming the challenges, overcoming the obstacles, figuring it out, how to get from point A to point B. And often it's probably not the same route that I used, but
Yes.
boy, they walked away with so much more than just the accomplishment. It's the whole entire process on how you solve that problem. And that's
Mm.
really, the development part of being a leader, so much more.
And as we end the show, sir, I have to ask, going back to the title of your book, right? The loudest sound in any organization, you said, is often the sound of what no one is saying. And you say, learn to hear it. Could you take us back, sir, to the USS Bataan in 2015? What happened that ultimately gave this book its title, The Loudest Sound is Silence?
Yeah, so I think as senior leaders, we often think that schedule perturbations and those type of issues are just kind of like, hey, that's just the way life is. That's the service we
Mhm.
signed up for. And we had been on, it was back in 2014, and it was a really long deployment. We
Wow.
got very few port visits, and I think we had been extended, probably for the third time on that deployment. It ended up almost being about 10 months.
Mm.
So it was almost a 10-month deployment, and what I found through all that is,
Long time.
after the end of that, there wasn't a whole lot of talking, and there was a lot of silence, and the crew wasn't happy. And what I realized is that, for the crew, their perspective was probably a lot different. It was about the things they were missing, the events that they had planned, all those types of issues. And it wasn't about problems that I could necessarily solve for them at that time. It was about really sitting down and listening to them and understanding them. And then on the edges, working those solutions that we could work.
Yes. Wow. But how can a senior leader, sir, distinguish healthy silence, when people are concentrating, they're thinking, they are busy executing, and dangerous silence, which is caused by fear, by resignation, or lack of trust? Because I remember there was another quote, I can't remember who said that, but he said in an organization, you really need to be worried when your hardest working people become silent, because what that means is they've already quit in their mind and they are on their way out. And you really have to pay attention to that. So I can a little distinguish, sir.
Yeah, there's really two different types of silence. There's silence in execution, where everybody is locked on. You're in sea and anchor. You're in a gun shoot. You're engaging with the enemy, and everybody is focused. And that is the one form of silence, which is actually certainly a measure of how focused and connected the crew is to what the evolution is going.
Yeah.
The other form of silence is in the debrief, or in the planning, or in the discussions, where people don't say anything, and therefore, because they don't think that their opinion is valued, or two, they always tell the captain, or always agree with everything the captain says, because they're either fearful or don't think that their input is valued. And those are the two, and you need to be able to differentiate between the two. One is good and one is bad. And if the part where, hey, you're debriefing something and no one's speaking, or you're planning something, or you're having a meeting and everybody's agreeing with you, that's a red flag where you need to kind of say, hey, I may not have been perfect, or I may not have taken your opinion on in the past, but I promise you I will do better in the future. I really need your input here. So,
well, so perhaps one of the others question would be then, what behaviors from the leaders kind of teach people that silence is probably safer than speaking up?
Well, I think probably, one, obviously the most important one would be, if you get defensive when people make comments, if you don't openly provide people the opportunity to sort of provide their input. And then I think probably thirdly, if they give their input and you consistently don't use it or don't do anything with it,
Yes.
that's what will often lead them to, not, interact and not, participate. I often would say, hey, come to me with a solution, provided it's not like crazy. I would often just go with their solution. It may not have been the one I would have picked, but that's their input. They're excited about it, and that's how they want to go about, accomplishing it.
I like that. And for the people who are listening to us right now, sir, if someone listening realizes that my people aren't telling me things anymore, what should that leader do tomorrow morning to begin rebuilding trust?
Yeah, I think they need to sort of engage with them and sort of identify that, hey, obviously something's not working. What is it, that is not working with the way we're interacting, or the way we're interacting? Is it a trust issue? Usually that's the bottom line, is, it's a trust issue kind of it sits down
Yes.
at the bottom from a lack of vulnerability. And I think you need to kind of get out there and tell them that, hey, whatever it is, we need to kind of fix this, because I need you all to be able to speak openly and candidly, and to bring me the bad news, so that I can accomplish this mission for the ship and for you all.
Wow. And can you give us? Looks like we're technically out of time. Can you give us 5 more minutes before we end the show?
Sure.
Okay, I'd like to do rapid fire, where I ask you a question and then you answer me with the first thing that comes to your mind. But before I do, we do have a question from a member of our audience. It says, agreed with Coach Busy. Oh, hold on. This is not General Turner. I guess he meant you, sir, because I had the General earlier, Captain Carter. So when substandard takes precedence, it didn't just happen. What is a quick shift to redirect your lowered standard?
I think the best thing to do, I think, at the end of the day is you need to kind of reestablish. You just need to reestablish that standard. I often would say, and I would tell myself, if it bothers me today, it's going to bother me tomorrow. And so, yes, there are times where maybe, for one reason or another, we allowed, the standard to slip over here. But, it's okay to re-engage. It may mean that you re-engage it back in sort of multi-steps. Maybe you take it from point A to point B over the next week, and then you go from B to C. And it's probably that it doesn't look quite as much as a knee-jerk reaction, but you still need to kind of get back on there. And it's a constant battle. I mean, it takes a lot of energy to maintain high-level standards. And it requires you to be sort of on point all the time. And there'll be areas that will slide that you can't cover down on all the time. And you just re-engage it. You have sort of open conversations about it. And then you sort of put it on them to say, hey, this is the standard. How do we get from where we are today to there? And then often I've often found that they're much more aggressive in sort of correcting it than my expectations were.
So how do you build trust, sir, especially in the Navy where the stakes can be extremely high? How do you build trust when you don't have a lot of time?
I think it starts one with consistency day in and day out with your principles. So, you need to, show up. You need to have sort of, here are my principles. This is what I stand for. These are my expectations. And you got to be sort of consistent in the application of those expectations. And then you got to couple that with high level of empathy and vulnerability. You need to be the person that's going to say, hey, I care about you and what's going on in your family. And you need to be able to admit that, hey, when you don't do something right, hey, this is the way, I didn't do this right. And here's how I'm going to be better. And I think if you kind of lay those three together, it really is what is the backbone of what, people who will have trust.
So insightful. Okay, this is our last segment, sir. I know we are technically out of time. So rapid fire, if you can define this with one word or as short a sentence as you can. Leadership is?
A privilege every single day to lead the greatest Americans our country provides us to defend this country.
And management is?
Management is the, sort of taking care of the process, the budget, all those kind of things. Leadership is, taking care of the people.
Wow. And what matters more, competence or character?
Character. I can teach competence.
Okay. What destroys trust fastest?
Not doing what you say you're going to do. Hypocrisy.
Best leadership advice you've ever received?
Probably, take care of the people, clear their roadblocks, and then the mission will take care of itself.
Good. And what about worst leadership advice you've received so far?
Don't get too close to your people. I think you need to get close. I think you need to understand what's bothering them. I think you need to understand their aspirations. And I think you need to then, help, them, achieve the things that they want to achieve.
And what is a leadership mistake, sir, you never want to repeat?
Leadership mistake that I never want to repeat. I never want to continue to sort of support, people who create a toxic environment or are not connected to the culture that I believe in.
Okay, let's suppose you take charge of a new command or you are the new CEO of a brand new organization. What do you do during your first 30 days?
First 30 days, it's all about listening, understanding, getting a baseline of where they are, understanding where the people are, what their aspirations and their goals are. You're kind of, sort of taking that along the baseline of those things that
Yes.
you value, and then formulating in your mind, the direction that you want to go.
I like that.
Usually after that 30 days, people are expecting change. You're new, so you should jump into that change.
Mhm.
There's nothing wrong with that. But I usually like to give it like 30 days to kind of figure out exactly where everything stands.
Wow, I love that. Okay, as we close, sir, after 3 decades in uniform, 3 commands at sea, manufacturing, leadership, teaching, coaching, and now writing, the loudest sound is silence. When you think about your legacy, what do you hope the sailors and leaders you've developed say about Captain John Jesse Carter?
Yeah, I hope they believe that, he had incredibly high standards. He had high expectations of us. He was always mission focused, but, at the end of the day, he cared, incredibly, cared about us, a lot, was so concerned about our personal success and
Mm.
never put his own success ahead of theirs.
And if you could stand before every young sailor, junior officer, new manager, and emerging leader listening to us today and leave them with just one leadership lesson from your journey, what would you tell them, sir?
I guess probably, listen to the silence.
Yes.
Yeah, it's
All right.
if people aren't talking to you, then you're probably not doing it right.
Yes. I have one more question before we end, but before I ask you the last question, sir, is there something I should have asked you today I didn't get a chance to ask? Anything else you wanted to share, sir?
No, you pretty much you covered most of all the bases. It was a great joy having an opportunity to talk to you, Bob. And I think people are saying that I'm frozen. I apologize.
That
It
that
was
is
still a
okay.
great conversation.
Yes, most people will be only listening anyway. It's
Yeah.
true. I do this live. 99% of the time it works perfectly fine, but that 1%, like last week, I lost power for like 30 minutes. So I had to use the battery on my phone, and we made it work. And what was even worse, I was speaking to a 3-star admiral, and I was like, oh my goodness, this is not the best time to lose power while you are interviewing a flag officer. But anyway, it does happen. So grateful for your time, sir. And can you let us know how we can get in touch with you?
Yeah, reach out. LinkedIn is fine, or you can jump onto my website and schedule a call, virtual coffee. Email me. All those kind of things. But excited to
Fantastic.
hear from everyone out there.
And LinkedIn, that's LinkedIn in john.jesse.carter, so easy to remember. And then your website is leadershipbridge.institute. So if
Yep.
you want to hire the captain, want him to come speak or coach, okay, here is my final question for you, sir. What is next for Jesse Carter, and how can our audience support your mission, sir?
Oh, well, certainly. What's next is that, my company, which I started probably about 12 months ago, is up and running. We have some great clients. And so certainly if you're into sort of the type of conversation we had here, and you're into sort of more of longitude learning methods, reach out, have a conversation with me and see if we're a good fit.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for your time, sir, and sharing your wisdom with my audience. Really appreciate that. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, thank you very much, Bob. It was great seeing you today.
All right, this is one for the book. Thank you so much for watching. And again, follow the captain. So his LinkedIn is in-john-jc-carter. And this website, leadershipbridge.institute. And of course, I want everybody to get a copy of this book. It's available everywhere books are sold. The loudest sound is silence. Leadership lesson from the bridge to the boardroom. Yeah, if there is really one lesson I have learned from our conversation today is, as a leader, you do need to be humble, right? You need to be able to listen, right? And if you are taking over a new command, you're taking over a function or an organization, I think for the first 30 days, like the captain said, you have to listen. first figure out what is going on. Don't start changing things right away. Understand the culture, the people, the mission, and then you can start making changes. So again, it's leading with humility. That's the one thing I've learned when I had the great privilege of becoming a commanding officer, is to lead with humility. Okay, let us know in the comment 3 to 5 takeaways from today's session. The replay will be available on LinkedIn and YouTube immediately, and it should be available on every major podcast platform by the end of today. And I haven't written it yet, but it's going to be written by the end of today. For our Black History Year, I'm going to be talking about General Daniel Chappie James Jr. He is the very first African-American 4-star general, and I'm going to be writing about him. So much to learn from his legacy. And let me see. Oh, tomorrow I will have another interview. I'm going to be speaking with Jack Mackinson. He's a LinkedIn top voice, communication expert. He has more than 100,000 followers. I'd like to find out in the world he did that. So that's going to be our live podcast tomorrow. And I hope you can join us. I should have the promo by the end of today. Okay. Bye for now, and thank you so much for watching.
Thank you for tuning in to the Leadership and Success Podcast with your host, Coach BZ. If today's episode added value to your leadership journey, be sure to subscribe, share, and join us again for more wisdom nuggets on how to lead better and achieve greater success. Remember, leadership is the most critical skill of our time. The world will always need leaders to inspire others, drive innovation, and execute meaningful strategy. So why not count yourself among the bold leaders shaping the 21st century? Until next time, stay inspired, stay committed, and keep leading with excellence.